One. Welcome everyone to today's podcast. My name is Paul. I'm a very happy member of Cocaine Anonymous. I live in Peterhead in Scotland, and I'm really thrilled to have been joined today by a friend of mine, Graeme M from Toronto.
Thank you very much for having me, Paul. It is an absolute pleasure of mine, having heard many of these podcasts with some of the other folks that you've, are other friends or folks that you've worked with, have been really, really helpful to me. So I'm honored / excited / nervous. So those are all good things. So thanks very much for having me. I should also say that I am an addict, and I'm calling from Toronto, Ontario, Canada today.
Really pleased you're here, Graeme. Thanks so much. So today I'm going to be handing over the floor to Graeme, who's going to share his experience of strength and hope with us. And then we'll be having open floor where we have some discussion about recovery. I just want to say, if you're new to the channel or if you're struggling with addiction, please listen to the message. Please come along to a meeting face-to-face or on Zoom. Never be put off going to a Zoom meeting. Only about a quarter of participants put their camera on. You certainly don't have to put your camera on. You don't even have to share. If you don't want to, you can just listen in. Later on in this podcast, I'll be putting out information about meetings on the screen, or reach out to us in the chat below this video. If you're seeing this posted on one of the Skype CA chat rooms, please feel free to reach out in there for help and support. We will certainly respond. Check out the other podcasts. There's one on each of the steps. There's about 7 personal stories. There's 3 on sponsorship. So there's lots of resources there. So without further ado, I'm really pleased you've come along today, Graeme, and I'm just going to hand over the floor to you to share with us today.
Okay, thanks very much, Paul. Again, Graeme Addict, and I guess I'll just start my story in addiction is quite a long one. I've just turned 50 this past April, and I guess my upbringing was not an abnormal one in terms of things like abuse and having a really bad alcoholic in the house or anything like that. I have been told since by my mother that my birth father was quite a drinker, but he was sort of out of the situation by the time I was about 7 years old. I don't have any memories of him drinking or them fighting or that sort of thing. In the little town that I grew up in, and this is in the 1970s, I don't think I have a one thing that I can remember as a young lad going over to anybody's house and there not being booze. I don't ever really remember seeing drugs, but then I don't think at that age I would have really known what they were anyway. But it was very much like that. It was a small sort of blue collar, logging mining town, and there was a lot of drinking, a lot of violence, a lot of husbands beating the hell out of their wives, and those types of things. So from that point of view, it probably could have been better, but for that time in small town Canada, I think that was probably pretty normal. I grew up with an older brother, younger sister, and my family situation was pretty good, I should say, not well. I grew up, like a lot of addicts, I think, feeling just a little bit tight and sort of out of place for whatever reason. It started quite early for me because I had speech issues. I actually still do sometimes. It comes usually from stress or if I have too much caffeine or things like that. So you might actually notice that during the podcast, but that gave me a very early sense of being different and being less than, for sure. And it also taught me to become very insular, because I was very afraid because of some really bad public stutters when I'd be asked to speak in class or on stage or, things like that. And I still have, horrible nightmares to this day about that. And so Definitely was not a kid who shared, my feelings or stresses or things like that. Again, growing up in the 70s as a male in a very, male-ish kind of culture, playing hockey and baseball, and you had to be tough kind of thing. I never really, I don't think I ever learned those kind of life lessons that would have probably saved me from a lot of suffering later on. Those emotional lessons about how to manage stress and how to manage you know stress and anxiety and shame, guilt, all those things that can bring you down. And so I guess I'll just fast forward to, I guess, what I consider to be my first drinking experience, and the first time I sort of had any prognostication of what might come in the future. I had moved from the small town I was in out to the west coast of Canada, to a town called Victoria, and there was a day off. I believe it was a Monday, and some of my new friends, I mean, I'd only known these guys for probably 6 weeks, invited me over to their place, and it was during the day. And I just remember we were sort of listening to music and hanging out, and then all kinds of crazy booze came out, and it was stuff that I'd never even seen before. It wasn't beer or vodka or anything. It was all at the time what I would have called like mom's drinks. Like they were sherry and wine, and I don't even know what some of the stuff was. Anyway, we just sort of made a big mishmash of it and drank it, and we all got very silly, and some guys started raging, some guys started crying, and I ended up fairly quickly with my head in the toilet. And prior to feeling absolutely awful, I did experience this feeling of sort of what I thought at the time was peace. And it was much easier to speak, and I all of a sudden was filled with all of this, I don't know if I'd call it, instant esteem, but I definitely felt better about, how my body felt, and that kind of numbness I mixed up with feeling good, and that would continue, for decades after that. But in that moment, as I was just feeling terrible and throwing up, and knowing that whatever hours from then I had to be at a job and look somewhat normal, I knew for sure that I would be trying to chase that feeling again, because this sort of awkward, stuttering kid who was, stumbling through puberty, that instantly gave me this sort of superpower, I thought. And from then on, I wouldn't have ever considered myself sort of a problem drinker. I definitely, if given the opportunity, drank too much. So I would put myself in the kind of bingey category at that point, I guess. I could go, long periods of weeks at a time even, but if I was given the opportunity to drink a lot, I certainly took it. And I guess, again, sort of moving forward into my university years, when everybody tends to, those are their years where they really sort of blow up and then get better later. I sort of did the opposite, I guess. I was never really a drug user at that point, even though on the West Coast, weed is a huge thing. I was never that way, for whatever reason. And alcohol was still a part of my life, very much a part of that culture. But again, I had jobs. I woke up. I didn't never miss classes because of drinking. I might have a headache or something, but it wasn't running my life at that point at all. And when I moved to Toronto, I guess in my late 20s, I pretty much came to Toronto on my own, and didn't know anybody. And in a sense, I guess, was isolating myself unintentionally. I did meet people very, very quickly, and became involved in the music and film community. And that, I guess, sort of, brought me into, that world again, where, sort of late 20s, people are in relationships and going out a lot. And I was definitely very much that way. And getting into a touring band, that's when I think I got kind of a window into that, things were really starting to go in the wrong direction. And I had previously thought up to that point that I had sort of, maybe missed the danger zone, because I always thought of, my 20s as being maybe the time if I was going to become an addict of some description, then, those would have been the years. But I guess it was just having the right opportunity. And when I had met my partner, who is still my partner 20 years later. She owned a restaurant, and so I was able to sort of drink fairly regularly because of access to her and her bar at the restaurant. And then we both, years after that, bought a bar together. And I think if I could put a bookmark in my life as to when things really went wrong, it was right around there. There were some sort of traumas, losses of businesses and stresses. We'd had a daughter just quite recently right around there, and bought a house and all these things. And within a very short time, we'd sort of lost both of our income streams. And because I've, I wasn't really a strong person when it came to dealing with stress or emotions or things like that. I would just kind of bury them. And the only thing that I had learned how to do was to drink or use drugs. At that point, I had started to use cocaine as sort of a party drug. And very quickly that became an issue, because it was very much an ego supporter. And at the time, being a bar owner was a big ego stroke, and being in a band and, getting all kinds of positive feedback from people. And I don't want to use the word adoration, that's a little strong, but, people appreciating what you do and saying so. And so my personal value of myself was very low, if not non-existent, but it was being held up by the thoughts and opinions of other people. And my behavior was getting worse and worse, but I was very careful to surround myself with other addicted people, or people who would at least, live that same life, if not, every single day like I did. They were, Thursday to Monday people for sure. I think it was at that point where I really needed, in order to just get through the day, in order to function at all, it was pretty much a round the clock kind of thing. And I was, spending money that I didn't have, and doing all of these things that I never thought in my wildest dreams I would do. And I don't have to go through a big long list, because everybody who's an addict knows that list. And we had moved into our new house, and I got to the point where those things sort of holding up my ego had gone away, and I just felt like I was drifting through space. And I felt very very useless and very low self-esteem, and just constantly under stress, because my body was always going in and out of using and not using, and going through periods of withdrawal, and then trying to fix it and trying to manage, and going through the big laundry list of trying to quit, because my life wasn't going anywhere. It was just going down the toilet. And trying my way, and reading books, and doing therapy, and because I've always thought of myself as a fairly smart individual, and thought as I stepped over people on the greats of the subway, that I was just a different kind of person than they are. I was very, very judgmental of those people, and I thought that I was better than everybody. And then I went through this period where I just sort of said F it, and I kind of romanticized the notion of being a stumbling moron, and in very short order sort of lost all of my real friends, I would say. Like I had lost all of my using friends years prior to that, because I just decided to use by myself, because that was much easier. And I definitely drifted into, deep depression, isolation. And during this time, during this whole period, needless to say, I mean, just being a terrible father and partner, and not through any, you know, violence or anything like that. It was definitely through the absence of love. The only thing that I cared about was my addiction. And so I've pretty well ignored everything else in my life in order to just stay drunk or stay high or whatever it had happened to be at the time. And I felt like I was one of those who was just a drinker. I just felt I was born with it. And some people are smokers, some people are angry, some people are, I don't know. I had given up really, and I was destined to probably die of something drinking related. I was definitely suicidal to the point of not throwing myself in front of a train or jumping off a building or something, but if I definitely did not avoid dangerous, life-threatening situations. I could have very easily, been underground multiple times as a result of my actions. And but for the grace of God, and I'll talk about that in a sec, I'm still here. So I guess about 2 years ago, my family started to get some inkling of how bad things were, for lots of reasons. I had started to sort of let them in. I have an uncle who's been a long time AA guy, 30 plus years, and I had always let him in a little bit, but I was still definitely in lying, cheating mode here, not being honest about how bad it was. And I finally got to the point where I had talked to my family, because I was in really bad shape and was scared for my future. And I didn't know what to do, because I had exhausted all of the things that I thought might work. And I think my partner and my daughter were just exhausted and traumatized by the whole experience, and just needed me to not be around for a while. So with that, my family offered to send me to treatment. This is not this last August, but the August before, and went away to a treatment center where I was to be there for 30 days initially, and that turned into 45 days. And I enjoyed the experience very much. It was not a 12-step program per se. It was a mishmash of sort of CBT therapies and psychological stuff. And there were big book meetings and NA meetings, and that was actually when I first started doing Zooms, because I had never actually done the Zooms before. And I started to gravitate towards CA pretty quickly, because I felt the fellowship was very inclusive, and it was very broad reaching. You could do anything. It really didn't matter, and you were welcome in CA. The few AA meetings that I've been to in person, and this is absolutely no grudge against AA as a program, this is just my experience. It seemed less flexible that way, and seemed to be a little more hardline in terms of the fellowship. So anyway, that's kind of here nor there, as they say, but really enjoyed that. And there were a few CA meetings that I started going to that are based here in Canada. One was called No Rock on Brock. That's a Tuesday and Friday meeting that I really enjoyed. And I just sort of went from there. And then after getting out of treatment for the first time, I didn't last very long, because it turned out that the drinking and the drug using, once I stopped, and I was in a very, very protected, isolated environment like treatment, where I couldn't get out without jumping a fence, sort of thing. I did fine in that situation. But when real life turned back on again, I was very ill-equipped to deal with that. And I don't know why I thought that after 45 days, or why my family thought, or anybody thought, that I would somehow magically be transformed after decades out there, just casting chaos everywhere around me. That's, 45 days of not drinking and using and reading and Zooming a little bit would somehow magically cure me. I was really kidding myself, because the what I really needed was spiritual connection, and I just didn't have that yet. And I had started working with a sponsor just prior to, well, not just prior, I guess just after I had gotten out of treatment the first time, and I always found excuses to not do the work. I was trying to make the work convenient and do the stuff that I enjoyed doing and not do the stuff that I found hard or challenging. So I went through a few sponsors and a few relapses, and because I had done 45 days, I was allowed to go back for 2 weeks for free for what they call relapse prevention. I had already relapsed, so I just went back for 2 weeks, basically just to get 2 more weeks of sobriety under my belt. That didn't work for very long either. And this past September 2021, after just a horrible couple of weeks, coming very close to death a couple of times, I went to a 10-day detox. And within the first few days of being there, I really felt that it was time for a change. I really didn't have the spiritual part yet, but I had definitely gotten to the point where there was that part of step one. There was the acceptance finally that I could not get through this on my own, and that I was powerless, and that there was nothing that I could do or that another human being could do to get me out of the situation. And I was in this detox for 10 days, and it was a fairly, no pun intended, sobering time for me. Lots of guys in there who were, on and off the streets, and, using really dangerous stuff, fentanyl mixed with all whatever you get. And it's, that's a just death sentence waiting to die. So when I got out, well, no, I actually didn't even come. When I was done that 10-day stint, I had come home very briefly, and then was able to go into a transition house for what ended up being 2 and a bit months, which was when, I guess just prior to coming into the transition house is when I came across your path, Paul, and your listeners should know that I first heard you share your experience in the program, and your solution and your words really hit home for me. And I loved your take on the program. And I immediately got in touch with you, and you were speaking on a great cross Canada group here in Canada called We the North. And I've called you, and I was absolutely desperate. And you said that you would take me through the steps, and graciously provided a lot of your time to me over the next, I would say we probably worked almost every day, with the exception of maybe a few days, for about, I would say 5 to 6 weeks, and managed to get through the steps for the first time. And there, what I really gravitated towards was that urgency to create that spiritual connection, and that had to be the most important part of the program for me. I'm great at, well, maybe I'm not great, but I'm decent at talking, but I've tried to talk my way out of this thing a million times, and knowing all the slogans and all the page numbers and all that stuff is great, but without that spiritual connection, I am in deep trouble. And it's a thing that I had to learn. I had to learn that it wasn't something new. It was something that had always been there for me. And all I had to do was do the work to tap into it on a daily basis. And I finally was able to surrender and accept, and know that was okay. And that it wasn't some sort of crutch. It wasn't something that weak people do. It's something that strong, brave people who want to change their lives do, And there was one there was one talk that we had where you had me sort of research how many people around the world have a creator in their life, and it's the lion's share of the world's population anyway. So I mean, who was I to think that I had some sort of magical way that all these people didn't. So anyway, that was just a part of ego shedding as well, of just saying I don't know anything, and I still don't know much. I'm about 100 days sober now, but they have been very very peaceful. I can say, for the first time in my heart, I have all these issues in my life that I would normally be really stressing about, and that would trigger me to use, because I didn't want to feel anything. I didn't want to feel sadness or shame or guilt, or why don't I have any money, why don't I have this, why don't I have that, why am I not a better partner or parent, or so going through the steps and dealing with doing your inventory, doing fears and resentments and harms, and having to acknowledge that what you've done to the folks that you, in most cases, for me, it was the people who I love the most, who I hurt the most. And that's a pretty, it almost seems like an oxymoron that you would do that, but they were the only people left for me to hurt, I think, just because they cared about me and knew what I looked like when I wasn't in active addiction. So coming to where I am now is an absolute total, and I've never used this word more in the last 100 days than I probably never used it in my life prior to these last 100 days. Where I am now is an absolute blessing. Miracles may be a little bit strong, but it is a blessing. And I feel, when I wake up every single day and I pray, I am grateful. I just thank my creator for giving me another day for me to go out there, and now I get a chance to help others. And know, I mean, really my motivation for speaking today, Paul, was just to share with people that it's not necessary to suffer. It's not necessary to be in addiction. There is a better way through it, and that you can get that spiritual connection. I fought it for so long, and I didn't have to. I didn't have to be suffering all this time, and I believe I just had to suffer for that long for some reason. I don't have to know why. I just have to know that the program that I'm working now has completely transformed my life. And when I would walk out the door every morning now, I'm not alone. I have a creator that is with me at all times now, and I feel that. I feel it like you feel the wind, or you feel warmth or cold or things like that. It's a very difficult thing to explain to somebody, but I feel that connection. And the way that I react to situations now is different. I just had, there's a chap who I was going to start sponsoring. He was going to be my first sponsee, and he didn't show up to our first meeting. We haven't really spoken since. And then he just sent me this tirade of very hateful texts, and this is a person who I barely know, and the sort of old me would have flown into a rage, or into what's your problem, and screw him, and F that, and I probably would have obsessed about it and maybe gotten back to him. But I was able to just be calm and tell this person, if you ever want to get rid of some of this anger and the obsession to use it. I mean, this is a program that's been around for a long time, and it works for a reason. I don't have to know why this thing works. It was worked out a long time ago. There is a power in one addict talking to another addict. And I think you've taught me that very well, Paul, that there is a very specific power in that. And if you read through the forwards in the book and the words by the doctors, they have no explanation for why the medical community can't fix addicts and why addicts can fix addicts. So I think with that, I'll pass back to you, Paul, and thanks very much for letting me share.
Thanks so much for sharing, Graeme. Wonderful to hear you. And divine grace, divine mercy flowing through simple suggestions put into practice habitually and devotedly daily has been my experience. And a commitment to abstinence in God's power and simple suggestions work very well together. And this week has had its ups and downs for me. A man I was working with has vanished, gone off the radar, and someone else has come back on the radar. So the solution is to be in the solution, I think. Graeme, and to be practicing these simple suggestions and to keep the mind and the body busy on a daily basis. I think that's something that's not spoken about very often, that ultimately, if you're not happy to be sober, then drunkenness can seem very appealing again. That's the fact. Now,
Very
happiness,
true.
the pursuit of happiness. Well, I often say to persons I work with, probably over 10 million folk in Britain are not happy on a daily basis, right? To
Yes.
find yourself happiness and contentment involves hobbies, interests, pastimes, working with others, finding spiritual literature you enjoy,
Yep.
having at least 2 pieces of spiritual literature that you check in with every day, even if it's just a page or two, having 2 pieces of recovery literature. There's vast amounts of both types of verbiage available. Keeping an eye on and maintaining a support network of half a dozen folk that you've got signed some kind of connection with, doing
Yep.
service, keeping your word, being responsible, and then rinse and repeat. And you will find that God's power and grace will meet you in the midst of all that.
Yes.
And now, I want to come to the crux of the problem, which is the peculiar mental twist. I want to talk about the thinking that precedes a relapse. And I want to talk about the thinking, which is very similar to the thinking that keeps us locked in active addiction all those years, right? The nub of the issue, the mental twist, the blank spot, and, why would I carry on using drugs and disregard the consequence, or not care about the consequences sufficiently, which is the nub of the issue?
Yep.
This job looks like it's going, let's get some more gear.
Yep.
Or the wife's going, I've got some gear here, I'll just sneak off and have some, it'll be all right. That's me out of money again, I can't tax the car or pay the mortgage.
Yeah.
Make that phone call.
That's right.
The madness, the ease and comfort. I remember saying to you, Graeme, drunkenness is like a beautiful woolen blanket on a cold winter's morning. The ease and comfort that we got through
Yes.
inebriation.
Yep.
The reality is that by asking God, the Creator, the King of the universe, for wisdom and sobriety and power of a morning every morning, will give you just that. And then follow simple spiritual directions. We're not a religious program, we are a spiritual program. However, we do talk about God, we talk about the Creator, we talk about sovereignty in step 11, praying for knowledge of an eternal personage's will and mind for us, which is that we're happy, healthy, and whole. It's very simple. And that we try to practice these principles and live by spirit instead of flesh. But just to come back, Graeme, how would you say you see things now in relation to your thinking throughout all those years, where you lived to drink and drank to live kind of thing,
Yeah. Well,
vis-a-vis your spiritual perceptions today?
I think it comes down to something that I've had a long time to think about, and it's a very simple concept that I just was not aware of for forever. I think addiction comes about as a lack of connection, and when you're disconnected, especially spiritually, your mind and your body, I think, yearn for something, some kind of connection, which for me, because I didn't see another way, the way that I would connect, or I thought there was some other way of feeling than how I was feeling. That was what I used booze and drugs for. And I used to misunderstand the difference between feeling better and feeling nothing. Because I was numb, I didn't really see that as feeling disconnected. But really, that's all I was. I was just disconnected, and it didn't matter how much I drank or used. You never get there. You never get to the point of feeling. You feel numb for sure, but you never get to the point of feeling peaceful and connected. All it does is just, and I'm just talking about me here. It just brought me closer and closer to chaos and closer to death. And it never made me happy. It made me miserable, and yet I would continue to do it.
Yeah, yeah. And working with others, and the chapter I've got on the screen is from the book Alcoholics Anonymous, often called the Big Book, which you can read or listen to 24/7, completely free at aa.org. And it's talking about working with others. And, a large part of our solution is prayer and working with others. Now, working with others can be conversing with people walking the same path regularly, a word of encouragement, a word of guidance, listening to their encouragement and their guidance, working the fellowship. Yes, work the program, work the literature, work your relationship with God, but work the fellowship. People
Yes.
put their numbers in the chat in Zoom meetings and put their hand up in face-to-face meetings for a reason, because they're happy to be available. It helps them. It's in the giving we receive, and, look, none of us are experts. This is the other thing, everyone has their own journey, right? Everyone has, and everyone's entitled to their own journey. We're all adults,
Yeah.
I'm free to choose, but I'm not free of the consequences.
Yeah.
Choices.
Very, very much so. Yep.
And I myself am still living in the consequences a considerable amount of time after, and that is the reality of the choices we made. You see, not every bridge can be healed, you see. And so what we have to do is suit up and show up for ourselves, and God gives us a measure of emotional sobriety.
Yes.
And then we can have a sober estimation of step one, which I think is the secret. I believe conscious contact. I believe that the principle of step one is transparency. For the first time for many of us, particularly when we're fresh in the door and we're starting the steps for the first time properly, transparency, step one, is where conscious contact with God begins. We may be unaware of it at the time because of all the carnage and chaos around us, but that's where the conscious contact begins in step one.
Mm-hmm.
And we do a proper inventory. It's the first 6 of the steps are inventory steps. Step 1, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 are all inventory stock taking steps.
Mm-hmm.
The other 6 steps are a response and the action in relation to all that inventory and what we're going to do going forward with our new life.
Mm-hmm.
You see. Now, I look at my consequences. I look at my unmanageability. I take a look at the inner unmanageability that results in the external unmanageability. I look at me and why I felt that I needed to be medicated with substances.
Yeah.
I think this is the nub of the issue. I've heard it shared that if you've done a proper step one, if you've got a proper step one, then you will never drink and use again because you're clear of the consequences and the reasonings behind the unmanageability, and you're aware of the solution.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have a measure of wisdom in able to practice active sobriety, which early on I believe involves a very practical choice about who we spend time with and living in the solution, that kind of thing. And I think the power of the fellowship is a wonderful thing, Graeme.
Absolutely. Yeah. And they say there's all these great sayings and stuff. They can get too much sometimes after a while, but they bear to be repeated. Being addicted, it means you're disconnected. That's it really, and the only way to get better in this program, I think, is to be surrounded by other people who are in the solution. And it's a program that is non-cultish, because there's not some glowing figure in the middle of it who you're supposed to worship. This book that we have is a series of suggestions saying just what I was saying earlier, that here's a way. It's not necessarily about stopping drinking and drugging. It's about how to live your life a better way. There is a better way to live your life. And if you take the word alcohol or using or anything out of this book, it really is just the 160 odd pages of how to be a peaceful, serene individual in a crazy world, you know, really.
You know, I was privileged to work with a dear friend who I took through these steps at the beginning of the year, and he's remained completely, continuously sober, but he wanted a new experience. So we went through them again and recently completed a third round of steps from a completely different perspective, Graeme, that of, you know, him having recovered. He'd completely recovered from the drug and drink problem. That was no longer
Yeah.
an issue. Of course, it being just a year. A year, we did look to somewhat degree about you know, active addiction as step one, but we chiefly looked at the inner disharmony, the cognitive dissonance, the internal disagreement, because that can still be very problematic
Mm,
whilst physically sober, right?
yep.
It's quite possible to be physically sober and yet be mentally drunken and emotionally drunken. Uh,
Absolutely.
and if you don't check that stuff in recovery with active recovery in a daily program of action, it will manifest in your speech, then your behavior. Your behavior becomes your lifestyle, and things can go pear-shaped. Now, now,
Yep.
now we looked at step one in terms of the intern. You see, part of us wanted to quit and knew we ought to quit, but part of us wanted to carry on using. That's part of the crux of the problem, an
Yeah.
internal disagreement,
Yeah.
internal disharmony. Or I know I should really quit, but I'll just get another one. Just be tonight. Or the end of the week, the end of the month, that'll be it. You
Yeah.
know, meanwhile, a year later, what's
Yeah.
going on? You know,
Yeah.
living to
Yeah.
use, using to live, ways and means to get more. Our whole life and thinking was centered in drugs, including alcohol. And,
Hmm.
you know, the crux of the problem is that wrong thinking that, in my opinion, is a direct result from disconnection from God, who I'm sure is a glowing figure, by the way. And
Oh yeah. Yeah. I meant sort of an earthly figure, some sort of, you know, snake oil salesman kind of.
oh,
But
no, but I mean, you know, connection with God gives me clear thinking, and clear thinking gives me clean living, and clean
yeah.
living gives me happy life.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think for me now that my challenge is, and you just mentioned it too, is that I I don't think I really grew up with the tools to be able to deal with life. So now the challenge for me is getting into that emotional sobriety and trying to deal with life's problems as a mature adult, you know. And I just the drugs and the booze just kept me from being able to deal with anything at all. And there's a great letter that Bill wrote, I think it was in 1958, where he's writing to a friend, and that's what he's pretty much talking about. When you get to this point that I'm at, where you're sort of 90 days and there's that sort of now what feeling. Now how do I deal with me? You know, now that you know, my mind is starting to defog a little bit, but I still have all of these I still have all these defects of character that I have to deal with on a daily basis. How do I manage those? You know, and so that's sort of where I am in the program now, and really trying to do a strong daily inventory, and, you know, doing the on awakening and on retiring, and just really trying to stay focused on those, because you're absolutely right. I might not drink or use, but man, can my behavior go south in a hurry, you know?
Well, that's right. That's right. And it really begins with the thought life in recovery. You know, thoughts become words, words become deeds, deeds becomes behavior. Well, it's behavior that becomes lifestyle, you know. And, you know, in recovery, we get to learn through prayer and meditation to observe our thoughts, you know, and to take a step back and to pause, 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 and use step 11. But I wanted to talk briefly about you know, getting into action. I was talking with a couple of members yesterday evening, and I think there's been a somewhat unfortunate trend in modern 12-step recovery, where persons are constrained. Perhaps they're new in, perhaps they've got a month clean. Right, you've completed all 12 steps, now go and find someone to sponsor. And I think that's a huge problem, because sponsorship is a tremendous responsibility.
Mm,
Someone that takes the choice to offer their help and services to another man or woman needs to know what the hell they're talking about. They have a
Yeah.
home group. They ought to have their own support and guidance. They ought to be established in their own personal spirituality. They need to have a working knowledge of the literature, right? You know, by all means, if someone feels they feel thus moved to help others, that's a wonderful, wonderful thing. You know, interaction, working with others is a huge part of the solution in step 12.
Mhm.
However, the problem is people are ill-equipped. You are equipped. I know you're equipped because I've spent dozens and dozens of hours with you. I know, you know, you're well able to take someone through this process, but you and me know that unfortunately some people are constrained, and very often the people that say, right, you've done step 2, I'll go and sponsor one, that's how they were treated. See, so
Right.
they just think, oh well, that's, yeah, off you go. Well, wait a minute, that's a huge responsibility.
Yeah.
And I think there's a huge gap. We've got 3 podcasts on this channel. What is sponsorship? Am I
Yep.
ready to become a sponsor? And how do I sponsor? So please, if you're listening and this topic interests you, check out those 3 recordings that are on this channel.
Yeah.
And you know, I think it's really important to get into action. I mean, filling our time with good things is very important, Graeme.
Mhm.
And if if you aren't helping someone else, then really you ought to be helping yourself. You
Yes.
see.
Yep.
Now
Yep. And
look, you know,
yeah.
we all end up watching Police Chasers on YouTube occasionally, you know, or a 1925 vehicle being restored. You know, there's time to relax, and of course there is. You know, no one's suggesting we need to be constantly in prayer and meditation in the literature. Of course,
Yeah.
we can relax. No one's suggesting we need to be fanatical about it.
Yep.
However, there has to be that balance, and I'm convinced that that's a relationship with God that gives you that serenity and balance.
Mhm.
And the solution to the threefold malady, which is the malady is disconnection, wrong thinking, wrong living. The solution is connection, right thinking, right living. You know, and by continually doing right living, we live our way into right thinking. That's the flip side.
Mhm.
You know, so it's a wonderful process.
Yeah. And to back to your point on being a sponsor and finding a sponsor is absolutely vital. And you were my 4th sponsor, and I had those first sort of cracks at it that I had, I was still sort of using on and off, and hadn't really come to that point of surrender, you know. And you really have to be there in order to get the most out of the process. You have to have a sober mind. You can't be dabbling in and out and do these steps thoroughly, you know. I know we spent quite a long time on step 1, and I'm very glad that we did. And also there were times where, you know, my ego was definitely getting in the way, and you challenged me on that, and I wasn't always pleased about it. But I think people have to know that a sponsor is supposed to challenge your thinking, because your thinking gets you into treatment. Mine did. And there are people out there who are living happy, sober lives who know a better way than people who are in an active addiction. So you have to be, that's where the honesty, openness, and willingness come in. You have to make that deal before you start doing the steps, I think, because otherwise you're just going to constantly be fighting with your sponsor. You really have to be able to shut up and listen to somebody else who knows more than you do.
Yeah, well, I think, you know, that you know, I think lively discourse is very helpful, you know. And you know, I mean, ego deflation and emotional sobriety are the 2 gifts of the process.
Mm-hmm.
Putting God first, others second, and then ourselves last is an
Yeah.
equation that we almost always find ourselves happy in. Whereas the equation where we was first, and then others, and never mind God, would have
Yeah.
ultimately led to our death.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah. Well, yeah.
so
And,
you know, I
and
mean,
yeah.
yeah. So I'm go on, come back in. Then I was. Go on.
No, I was just going to say, you know, I'm just reading through step 1 again here, which I read over and over again, and there is that word that your ego hates: powerless. Your ego does not want to hear that you have an issue, that you're powerless, that, you know, that's a huge fight. That's why step 1 for me was huge. That was about getting rid of that part of my mind that does not acknowledge that I am powerless, and it seems like a very simple thing. There was one sponsor who I worked with who I think we spent 30 seconds on step one. He said, "Are you powerless?" And I said, "Well, of course I am." And then he was like, "All right, let's move on," which is ridiculous, right? So
Precisely, and that's precisely the issue, you see. But anyway, I mean, you can only do what you can do, and you can only help so many people, but you do make a difference to the persons that you help. That's the thing. And a precious brother said to me yesterday that when you've got a strong message, you sometimes attract very sick people, and that was what you described earlier. But I think I mean, it's all about principles in God's grace and mercy and power, as far as I'm concerned. That's the reality.
Mhm.
And a little bit of willingness goes a long way in God's hands. And we get the help, and as we seek to be servants instead of masters, we suddenly find ourselves on a new footing. These are sick people, how can we help them?
Yeah,
What can I do to be helpful to this man or woman? And really, there's nothing better to do on the planet than try and help others. It
I
is
agree.
it is an altruistic program.
It is.
And I mean, it's very interesting. I've just been reading the doctor's opinion with somebody again today, someone that started back on step one that'll be as thorough as the one we did, Graeme, probably hours, and I absolutely don't mind because it's essential, particularly 1, 4, 11, very, very, very important. And
Absolutely.
there's a bit in there where the doctor writes, that no doubt this will be useful for many people going forward. If only he knew. I mean, they reckon well over 20 million folks have found lasting sobriety through AA, NA, and CA. That's not to
Yeah,
mention GA and SA and all the other 12-step programs. They reckon there's about 100 12-step programs. And the beautiful thing, the holistic nature of 12-step recovery for me, Graeme, is that you can deal with anything: gambling addiction, sex addiction, food addiction, materialism, commerce addiction. I don't know what the fancy term is. Indulging yourself in shopping and things like that.
sure.
Anything can be dealt with these 12 steps.
Yep.
And that's the miracle of it. And I've seen that happen. I've seen people clean and sober, Graeme, that have been dying from obesity by overeating. And I've seen them. I know a man in America, and he'd been clean and sober a while, but he'd ballooned to 25 stone. Now, I don't know. I think we had this discussion. I think you do understand stones, but in
I
America,
do. Yeah. Yeah.
yes, well, a 20 stone is 280 pounds. That's 370 pounds,
Yeah.
which is a big man. And so he's now half the man he used to be. He used the 12 steps and reduced his food intake, and he's still alive to this day. I knew another man that was clean and sober, but had got into gambling so much he'd lost his job and his marriage and his home. And he managed to practice abstinence from gambling and use these 12 steps. I've known people get clear of porn addiction, of shopping addiction, and that's the wonderful thing. And there's the life skills that can be developed through conscious contact and through surrender and through fellowship and identification, is
Yeah.
the way forward. We grow in recovery in areas we weren't even aware we needed to grow in. That's why we've got to be very gentle with ourselves.
Yes.
Just go on quietly. Just
Yeah.
go on quietly. No need
Yeah.
for any
I know.
fanfare. Prayer,
Yeah.
literature, find literature you like to read. You can pray washing up, in the bathroom, in the shower, in bed, getting up, going to sleep, driving the car. Pray, pray, pray. Trust, have faith, do the next right thing. When I do the next right thing regularly, my best foot gets a little bit better when I put it forward. And
Yes.
my worst foot gets a little bit better as well. And you just
Yeah.
keep on keeping on. And I think that's the solution, Graeme, is to be practicing the solution and never, ever give up. If you're listening to this, listeners, and you're struggling, keep on keeping on. Never give up, and reach out. I put up information about meetings earlier in the podcast. Please rewind the video and have a look at those and come along to a meeting. There is lots of literature available. As I say, there's 30 odd podcasts on this channel. please feel free to reach out in the chat below this video. There's plenty of help and identification available. And that's more or less a wrap for today. But before we do bring things to a close, Graeme, I just want to give you a minute or two to address our listeners with in summation.
Sure, and thanks very much. And I've very much enjoyed this chat that we've had, Paul. I know we used to joke when we used to work together that we could go on, and I think we very much could go on. But for the sake of our listeners who probably have to eat and shower and do all those things, we'll keep it short. But I guess if I had one thing to pass along, and this is just from a guy who had, I'm almost 100 days sober, and for all the people out there who are just getting started or thinking about starting, the most important thing you can do is do just what Paul says, just to suit up and show up. That's the hardest part, is just showing up. And once you get into this solution, it is such a better way to live. I wouldn't wish living in that world for anybody. And if I had one, sort of hope or gift that I could pass along to anybody, it's that you don't have to suffer out there like I did for 25 years. You can, and I see so many young people in the rooms now, and I just think it's fantastic that there isn't a stigma, there's less of a stigma now than there used to be, I think. So just get busy getting better, and that there's a better life out there, and this program can get you there, and you will live a spiritually fit life, which lets you be happy, joyous, and free.
Absolutely. And I just want to encourage anyone that's struggling with addiction. Sponsorship is a wonderful, wonderful thing. To get clear-cut direction from someone that has a message with depth and weight, and to learn about putting pen to paper, column inventory, learning about yourself and connecting with a power greater, so you can get free and stay free. So look, it's been wonderful having you here today, Graeme, and it's been a crystal clear message. And yes, you're right. We could certainly talk, I'm quite sure, continuously, and it's a wonderful thing to be able to do so with a clean and sober mind, because the vast majority of the things we talk about are absolutely true, and that's what Silkworth says at the end of the doctor's opinion. He says you can rely absolutely on anything these people say about themselves, and that's such a blessed statement when you think about it, because that wasn't the case when we was high as a kite, right?
It's very much so, yes.
And recovery is the gift that keeps on giving. Miracles happen in these rooms, they absolutely do, in the rooms of 12-step recovery, whether it's NACA or AA, and I personally love CA. I think it's a vibrant young fellowship, and I think it's crystal clear direction.
I do as well.
I like the freshness of it, the verdure of it all. And I just want to give a shout out to literature that's on the screen. It's from a book called Alcoholics Anonymous, which is available to be read or listened to at aa.org anytime, and is available for about $15 from Amazon and eBay delivered, which is I think it's about $20, 15 UK pounds. You can get it for £11 from alcoholics-anonymous.org.uk if you live in the UK. But please reach out for support and help. There's plenty of help out there. So that's going to be a wrap. Thanks so much for tuning into today's broadcast, family. We'll be back with another recording soon. And so look, once again, lovely to hear you, Graeme. Good stuff, my brother.
Thank you, Paul. Thanks so much for having me. I really enjoyed it.
It's been great having you. Thanks for sharing. Until next time, family. Shalom, shalom.